As you are calling, we're going to get things started with some samples. And Jim, this is just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, it is. This is thanks to Steve Spomer in our department. He collects old things. And this is a poster that actually comes back from the late 40s, early 50s when Backyard Farmer started. And it's a great poster. It has a very simple kind of a response to any problems that may beset us, like insects. Dust now, kill the bugs. Acme insecticides. So it must have been a favorite of Wile E. Coyote, don't you think? Acme brand. But it's interesting because pesticides have come a long way. There was a revolution just in World War II and thereafter. A lot of insecticides were developed. They had general impact on all kinds of insects. We've seen a lot of change since then, and there are so much more nowadays, so much more environmentally friendly, more tailored for the target pest rather than, say, the mammals and birds or whatever around. And I just want to give you some example of some of the recommendations from 1954 and 1955. Now, you've probably heard some of these already on the program last year, this last session with Fred, but if somebody had a pine sawfly question, Fred gave a recommendation, right? Probably carbaryl or just knock it off the branches, okay? Pine sawfly, control with 0.25% DDT sprays covering foliage well. Standard arsenate of lead sprays with lime are also very effective. All right?
Wow.
And how about another one for shade tree borers? Sprays of DDT applied to the trunk beginning the latter part of this month and repeated every 3 weeks during the summer may be of some help. And we all know that some of these pesticides have accumulated and they, like DDT lasts like maybe 30 years in the soil once it hits the soil. And so it's amazing. We should really appreciate all the people who develop these pesticides and are refining them with all those things in mind, the environment and human safety and persistence too. They don't persist as long as they used to like years ago. So that's the show and tell for entomology.
That is great. Thanks, Jim. All right, let's see if you can beat that one, Lowell.
I don't think I can. Once again, I have to follow that. What I have is last week, we've had an incredibly warm March, one of the warmest, if not the warmest on record. But now we've kind of have a few days of cool weather and frost. And what I have here is a yellow nutsedge plant. You can see that the tips of the blades have been frosted off and have died. But if you look down in the center of the plant, it's growing nicely. And Zach Riker put a turf tip up, and when we talk about these weeds and frost potential, we have to talk about microclimates. And even though it's been cold in air temperature, a lot of times that's taken about a meter above the ground, but right next to the ground, it's usually tempered a little bit. And some of these weeds like yellow nutsedge, it's a light frost is just going to slow them down a little bit. They'll keep on growing here.
And of course, yellow nutsedge is the one thing that people really, really don't like.
Yep.
All right, what do you have, Lauren?
Well, last week we had a question about powdery mildew on turf, so I brought some in this week to show. And this is one that we're seeing in our shady areas in the landscape, and usually on the north side of the house or under trees. Anywhere we have low light conditions, you'll see these kind of powdery appearing leaves. And on some of these, you can see the nice little tufts of white fungal growth on there. Sometimes the blades will be fully covered. But in any event, all of those areas that are white on the leaves are producing millions and millions of spores for that disease to continue to spread. So if we're in a situation where you see that in your landscape, a few things you can do. Try to do anything to increase light penetration if that's possible, if you've got a real dense canopy over top. Those are some of the first things, and to try to control it or manage it with environmental modification if at all possible. If you are in a situation where you really need to management, there are several fungicides available that you can use. If you go to a garden center, you'll see a range of different products available for powdery mildew. Some of the ones that have mycobutanil or propiconazole are reasonably good products that you can use for that.
All right, and it's awfully early for that, isn't it?
It's really early, just like everything's happening this year.
That's right. Kelly, what did you bring tonight?
Well, I brought this is a Caryoptera shrub, or blue false spirea might be another name you know it by, but it's one of the suffrutescents, that word. And basically, that's a shrub that would be hardy down south, but here in Nebraska, typically it'll die back fairly close to the ground. And the pruning that we always recommend on the suffrutescents is we tell people to go ahead and wait until you start seeing just those leaf buds just starting to show, which typically they would just start to show, maybe not even by this time of the year, but this year you can see this one is almost already starting to leaf quite a bit. And then we tell people to go ahead and prune it back to just above where you see a living bud, which often on this shrub, this is a shrub from my yard, and I frequently will go back to about 6 inches. But this year, because of the mild winter, it survived 2 to 3 feet tall is how it survived. And if you follow our recommendation of prune it back to the first living bud, that would be way up here. Yeah. And so you don't necessarily have to follow that recommendation. You can go ahead and still take it back to as tall as you want, 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches. And otherwise, they can get really large. They can get maybe lanky and a little bit larger than you want them to be. So it's that time of the year. They're starting to leaf out. Go ahead and prune. You might want to ignore the recommendation, though, to go to the first living bud and take it back a little bit further even. I'll probably take mine down to 6, 12 inches like I usually do.
Thanks, Kelly. And I know butterfly bush is another one that falls into that category. And I think the ones south of your building, Jim, were 6 feet
they
tall.
finally whacked them off this last week.
They did.
They were
Not
like
very low.
7
yet.
or 8 feet tall.
I know it. All right, let's start with a question for you then, Jim. This is a viewer who wants to know how to get rid of carpenter ants in a weeping willow, 7-year-old weeping willow. They had an old ash tree taken down because of them, and now they think they're in the willow. They don't want to lose the trees. They don't want the carpenter ants.
Okay, when you get carpenter ants in a willow, usually you're going to find that the center of the willow itself probably is rotted, because that's how carpenter ant colonies get started. They start in the rot. So you have issues with the condition of the tree in the first place that really need to be addressed. The carpenter ants nest there in the rotted wood. Sometimes they'll start, creating galleries and tunnels in the fresher wood. But again, they are not responsible for the demise of the tree. If you want to apply a carpenter ant bait, you just look for ant baits at the, your local store, hardware store, home, discount center, whatever, and you look on the baits to see if it actually covers carpenter ants. You get these ant baits, and you have to make sure that it covers carpenter ants, because carpenter ants are kind of finicky. And so you may want to make sure that that's on the label. The other thing that you can do is try to insert or blow some dust in the area where the colony appears to be, boric acid powder, and just do that continuously so they pick it up on their bodies and carry it into the colony proper, and just kind of rub it off on each other. Again, what do you say about the tree here? There's something going on that's probably far more serious than carpenter ants.
Right, exactly. All right, Lowell. This is a viewer that has an RTF fescue lawn.
Okay.
So rhizomatous tall fescue for viewers who don't know what that means yet. The question is it better to water it twice a week for an hour each time, or 3 times a week for 40 minutes apiece?
Actually, I would probably say neither. We could probably be a little better, or we could irrigate a little bit less. The fescues tend to be a little more water use efficient and don't need that much irrigation. Irrigating on a regular schedule might be okay, because we've been incredibly dry here for the last 3-4 weeks. But if we get back into a normal soil moisture situation, I think it's better to irrigate more as needed, and turf can actually go a little bit on the dry side, and we can be more efficient with our water use that way, and then also basically save a little money on the irrigation bill as well.
All right, thanks, Lowell. All right, Lauren, let's start with what I think might be something related to what you just talked about. This is a viewer in Lincoln that has Marvel turf, which I think is an old turf type.
Okay.
But this year it has patches of gray in it, and they're seeing more patches appear.
Okay. And I don't know if Marvel, is that a I don't know that cultivar. Is that bluegrass?
It's a bluegrass.
Sounds okay.
Yeah.
If it's bluegrass, especially
Yeah.
with patches of gray, it's probably the powdery mildew we just showed a little bit ago. If the viewer could just take a look at their lawn carefully and see if you see those blades that have that kind of like baby powder on them, that would be what we're working with. And then anything you can do to increase air circulation, open up some canopies and trees, that's going to help. And then finally, if you really want to try to manage it, then you can look at a foliar fungicide application and just make sure that powdery mildew in turf is on the label.
All right.
What
thanks.
about it? What about initial stress? You know, just when you start seeing the turf starting to stress out, it has that grayish cast too. So if you didn't see the
Yeah, if you didn't see any of the fungal growth on the grass blades, like
Yeah.
we showed, then it could be some just slow coming out, maybe.
Yeah.
Possibly. But things are pretty green right now, so.
Right. We did see some turf issues that I think was probably drought stress earlier
Yeah,
this week
okay.
in Lincoln. Yeah. Okay, Kelly, this is a viewer that has a question about a new boxwood.
Okay.
It's called Highlander, which is a sempervirens type. They want to know if it's a good choice for papillion for a privacy screen. It does need to stand up to heavy snow or strong wind.
Okay. Well, first of all, boxwood probably isn't the best choice for strong wind because they are an evergreen. They're what we call a broadleaf evergreen, and in strong wind situations, they could winter burn during the winter. The other thing is Highlander probably gets about 2 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller, so that would not do very well for a privacy. So I think there are much better choices out there. If they want an evergreen, they might want to look at one of the upright junipers. You know, I'm not real sure, you know, is it full sun? If, you know, I'm assuming if it gets a lot of sun and wind, then or a lot of snow and wind, that maybe it's full sun. But if it's you need to know if it's a full sun location or part shade. But I would look into maybe, or how tall they actually want it.
Right.
But, you know, there's better choices like some of the upright junipers or maybe one of the privets. And, you know, maybe call the Douglas County Extension Office and ask for some suggestions there.
All right, Jim, we have a question about boric acid. A viewer wants to know where you find it.
Okay, I mentioned boric acid in the case of carpenter ants. Boric acid is actually used in laundering, but you can get it, you know, roach proof. Paul Harvey used to advertise roach proof. Roach powder is still boric acid as well. So I think if you just go to your typical store that has all kinds of stuff, just ask for boric acid powder. But if you want to buy those brand names, boric acid for killing cockroaches and other insects, you got that as well. And it's really finely ground, and that's the key. Finely ground so it sticks to their bodies, and they groom themselves, they get sick, and they die.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, you get the first picture tonight, speaking of turf, but this isn't turf.
Okay, all right.
This is a viewer, actually, Lowell, that sent in a lot of pictures of both herbaceous and woody plants with this kind of damage appearing. And,
Okay.
and the question was whether it was herbicide drift or something else.
Yeah, I took a kind of closer look at these, and some of these leaves look a little bit malformed. But if you look closely at them, they're kind of rolling on the edges. And if this was kind of 2,4-D or a phenoxy type of herbicide injury, you would see the leaves more cupped and probably a little more misshapen than what we're seeing in this photo, which leads me to believe it's probably more of a environmental conditions than an actual herbicide problem there.
It does look like it could be wilt.
Right.
When you look at it, it's pretty lush, succulent growth, even for this year.
Right.
And so it could just be that lush, succulent growth, if it's in a very hot spot, it could be just dry soil and you're seeing some wilting. So maybe give it a shot of irrigation and see if that helps.
Right, exactly. All right, Lauren, this is a viewer that apparently they have blight in the garden plot. It didn't say what kind of a blight, but they've been using garden dirt and then amending with peat moss and compost so whatever was in there before. They're also not saying what kind of vegetables, but you want to talk a little
Well,
bit about blights in the
just
soil?
In general, the blights that are going to come to mind, if it's a backyard garden, they probably have tomatoes or some things that we may see some foliar blights, which just some good sanitation and making sure you're cleaning your garden site up. If you have a large garden site and you have that, if you can rotate where you're growing your specific crops, that will help quite a bit, because many of these fungi that cause blights will overwinter in the soil and many times in the residue. So again, that sanitation is important. The other thing is, when you establish your garden, if after the plants are growing well, you can incorporate some mulches and maybe any type of mulch to keep the soil from splashing onto the leaves. That's going to help a lot. And then the final thing I'd recommend is making sure you're not overhead irrigating. So some soaker hoses or just something to keep the water not on the leaves. And that would be just some general blight management.
All right, thanks.
Resistant cultivars as well.
Yes.
Right, good idea.
But they need to know what they're getting
Right, that they're
resistance.
dealing
So
with.
That's true.
Not sure, but if they do know, then they can do that.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Kelly, this is a Bloomfield viewer who has a lilac hedge that apparently is also really happy this spring, suckering, and wants to know how to get rid of the suckers.
Okay, that's can be a tough. It's an ongoing problem, and you can get rid of them by either hand. You can mechanically pull them up and prune them off down low. Sometimes some people will dig them where they're rooted, and they'll share them with friends. If that's not feasible, then you can. There are herbicides that you can use, or not really. It's not actually a herbicide. Well, one of them is, but there's one called Sucker Stop that you can apply to the foliage or the suckers themselves, and it won't harm the main shrub that they're coming off of. And there's another product called Phenoli. And again, you can find those at local garden centers and so on, and read the label directions pretty closely. And I think usually they'll have to be applied probably more than one time, but that's the annual treatment. It won't go away.
And I sort of like the pass it to your neighbor treatment a little bit better. All right, Jim, you get a picture next.
Great.
And this is a thriving, established asparagus bed, but it has this insect feasting away. They appear to be coming out of the soil as some of the spears are being chewed before they're even an inch
Hardly
tall.
out of the ground. Yeah.
They want to know what they are and what they can treat with that will not cause the asparagus to become unsafe.
Well, this is the classic asparagus beetle. It's the one that occurs first thing in the springtime. There's another one that's orangish and has spots on it, and that comes a little bit later and feeds on the asparagus berries and does a little bit of damage to the foliage. But this is the important one because it's overwintering right there on that site. It's important to clear away a lot of that residue or all that residue because it offers protection for them. You could probably restore residue if you wanted to after a first hard freezes, just for protection of the asparagus after that. But it's important just to get those beetles out of that area where they overwinter, because they're poised and ready to go. As soon as those little spears pop up, they're right on them before you even have a chance. And so the other thing that they do besides that is they deposit their grayish eggs on the spears. And those things are hard to come off. They stick so tight on there, it's hard to clean them off. So the important thing to do, of course, is if you can, try to cover it. What I would do is try to clear it all off, make sure there's no beetles down below in the bed, and then cover it with a mesh type cloth to keep any beetles from the outside from coming in. And then, of course, do your harvesting. Harvest your infested spears best you can. And in that way, you're removing them also, because those, if they're left by themselves, they will produce larvae, which will continue to feed. So that's probably the way to break it. The normal pesticide for it is carbaryl or 7 or permethrin, and they probably have like a 3-day waiting period before you harvest. And so that's your option whether you want to take it or not.
All right, thanks, Jim. All right, Lowell, how do you get rid of henbit in lawns?
Henbit's a winter annual weed, and because of, we sound like a broken record, because of the warm spring that's occurred here, it's already kind of advanced through its life cycle, and it's flowered. They're actually probably are dropping mature seed at this point in time. And we recommend, well, actually at this point when the henbit is already mature and dropping seed, herbicides really aren't that effective at this point in time. We always talk about fall applications, and wherever you have henbit this fall, think about a fall application because it will be there again because it's dropping seed right now. But with some of the winter annuals, keep mowing it right now, and over the next probably 3 or 4 weeks, it will probably kind of burn itself out and be gone.
All right.
It'll go away shortly.
Thanks. All right, Lauren, this is a viewer who actually saw this viburnum and wondered if we're talking about some sort of strange virus that's causing that yellow mottling in the foliage. Or is
Yeah,
it
well,
supposed to be that way?
Yeah, you can see the yellow streaks in the mottling. And this time of year is a great time to see viruses in a lot of our perennial plants. And actually, if we're looking at this particular leaf, you can see the green, the dark and light green blotchiness, and then you see the yellow streaks in it. This is actually just the specific cultivar trait. But if you see plants that are typically pure green in the leaf color and they have this blotchy green color, that's a nice symptom of a virus many times. So it can be difficult to tell if we're dealing with a specific cultivar or a virus, so knowing what that cultivar looks like is the first thing. A lot of the hostas, or really a lot of those have many different color breaking patterns in the leaves and things that can look like viruses. But in general, if the foliage, if you've had any history with the plant and in the past, the foliage has been a nice normal green color, and when it's cooler, a lot of times if the virus is in the plant, it'll come out and have that blotchy green color. That's a plant that will typically not make it long term. It'll succumb to other things like crown and root rots and things like that. So right now, for example, Rudbeckia is one that I see it in quite a bit early in the season in a patch. And if you watch that patch, it'll typically decline a little bit slower. There's not anything you can do really for it except rogue it out. So in this case, hopefully, viewer didn't rogue this out already. It's a pretty nice viburnum. They're very nice. But anyway, make sure you know what you're dealing with.
That one is supposed to be yellow.
It is. Yeah, it's called variegata, I think, is the cultivar.
Yeah, one of the lantana
Right.
viburnums.
Yeah. All right, Kelly, lilacs. Again, this is a Springfield viewer that got a gift of a lilac. It's on the west side of the house, 3 to 4 years old. They haven't pruned it. It hasn't bloomed yet. So
What's the question?
why isn't it blooming?
Oh, why isn't it blooming? It could just be the variety or the cultivar of lilac, and that's blooming a little bit later. Or it could be age. Give it a few more years. But I know a lot of the common lilacs are in full bloom and almost ending their bloom, and at least in the Columbus area. But I have one in my yard, and right now I'm drawing a blank on the cultivar, but it's not blooming yet, and it's plenty old enough. So either the cultivar, one that blooms a little bit later, or it may just be too young yet. So, and hopefully they didn't prune. The other thing is they produce their flower buds the previous season. So you want to prune lilacs after they flower. If you prune them when they're dormant, you'll remove those flower buds. So make sure you're not pruning during the dormant period. Wait until after flowering.
All right, Jim, this is a Valentine viewer that has dwarf Alberta spruce east of the house, full sun, loss of a lot of needles. She thought it was deer, but now she's hearing that perhaps it's spider mites, which is classic on that little spruce.
Could happen, yeah.
They want to know how to treat, and then they want to know whether it'll fill in that dead part.
Maybe the second question, whether it will fill in or not, it probably won't fill in the dead part, but the other growth might eventually conceal the damage. I've seen that with other spruces and remarkably covered up very well, but it takes maybe several seasons for that. But it could be spruce mites. Spruce mites, again, have the stippling of the needles. Check to see if the needles really look dirty because they produce a webbing that all this dust and dirt accumulate in. Take a piece of paper and whack a branch or two over that piece of paper and see if you can see their tiny little green bodies crawling on there. And if so, then you can apply something like we usually suggest bifenthrin because it has a miticide activity to it as well. And so you can apply that preferably, on a cool day. You could possibly apply an insecticidal soap if it's a cool day. But stay away from any oils because spruce will discolor a bit with the oils. So give that a try and make sure that the evidence is there before you take any action.
Great, thanks, Jim. I'm going to give you a couple, Lowell. This is a Fremont viewer and a Ravenna viewer, and one wants to know how you control weeds in asparagus. The other one, specific weeds, kochia and giant ragweed in raspberries and blackberries.
Okay. We're actually probably a little bit late for controlling weeds in the asparagus. The options that we have are kind of a preen-based control, but it needs to be down pre-emergence to the weeds. So if the weeds are already up and growing, actually hand hoeing or hand pulling is about the only option in asparagus at this point. And it's probably something similar for the giant ragweed and kochia in the raspberries, because there's not a selective herbicide that's going to take broadleaves out of the perennial broadleaf crop. So unfortunately, being able to selectively take them out post-emergence is kind of a hand operation at this point in time.
All right, and the great thing about all the weeds this year is think of all that wonderful green matter for the compost pile.
Yep.
Got to be positive, right?
That's right.
All right, Lauren, this is a viewer that has a 2.5-year-old North Star sour cherry. Looks to be a fungal infection around the base of the tree. After rain, it gets this sort of growth appearing, then it dries up but sticks to the bottom of the tree. They wonder if it's a canker. Seeing little tiny cherries on it, but then they've got this other stuff. It's been suggested they use a 10% bleach solution on if it's a fungus.
Yeah, so a couple things. So if you notice where it's at on the tree, it's down at the base. So this is a canker, and it probably was caused by some sort of wounding. Maybe it's from a mower or a weed eater or something like that, where something injured that. It could have even been a rabbit or something chewing around it, just to get that injury initially. But in any event, at the level of damage that you have and the way this is looking, I always hate to give these types of diagnosis, but unfortunately you're better off to just remove that and start over, because that tree's not going to make it. You could try all kinds of things, and you're going to end up with a very weak tree if you can even keep it alive. So unfortunately in this situation, I think I would just commit to the idea of starting over. You know, if you want to try to keep it and try some things you may hear about, but you're most likely not going to have success.
They might want to consider a mulch layer to protect it. If the wounding was caused by a lawn mower, then they may want to go ahead and put a good 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch around that tree. Don't pile it up against the stem, because that can cause problems too, but that'll at least protect it from
but they'll
not
never,
rabbits, but from
Yeah.
the lawn mower.
in future establishments, but you won't be able to get rid of that canker that's on there at this point.
Right, at 6 inches below the point of canker is
It's
kind of
soil
low on
level.
this one.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. All right, Jim, this is a viewer that last year had tomatoes destroyed by little black slug-like things, and they wonder how to control it this year. Little black slug-like things
Wow.
destroyed their tomatoes.
The only thing I can think of are slugs, garden slugs, but they usually feed on rotted. For example, if you have wounding from some other kind of a cause, it could be an insect, it could be crickets, it could be a rodent. Then you're going to have picnic beetles, for one thing, that get in those wounds, and you can get slugs in there too, especially if it's dry out, and they'll feed on the inside of that as well. So I don't know. I just hope this next year's better. Things don't often repeat themselves year after year for Nebraska. That's the beauty of living here. And so hopefully it'll be better for you this next year. Try to keep the tomatoes or whatever higher up, when you had them all in your cage or whatever, higher up, a little more ventilated under there, and that will keep slugs from moving up in that direction too.
All right, we have actually 2 nightcrawler questions, Jim. Hills are so large, they're ruining the lawnmower in Elm Creek, and then in Lincoln, same sort of thing. They make the lawn rough. They don't really want to destroy. They know they're beneficial,
Right.
but
The only thing I can think of really, because we don't have anything to control night crawlers other than bringing kids to try to grab them and take them away as fish bait, but take a power rake, I guess, mow fairly low. You can pipe in if you want to low, but mow fairly low within acceptable range of this time of year, and take a power rake and try to just knock down those casting piles. That's about all you can do. When the soil is dry as it has been, those castings are actually pretty hard and rocky like. But
Yes, especially if it has a lot of clay.
that's right, especially a lot of clay. But you know, this too will pass, because by the time when we start getting into the warmer, drier weather, night crawlers go deep down into the soil profile and they rest. And they won't come back until we get another longer period of rain or until autumn comes.
All right, thanks. All right, Lowell, this is a Malmo viewer that has a plant that she called Star of David,
Okay.
ornithogalum, in the yard. The plant has leaves shaped like little grass things and little white flowers. How do you kill it? Because it's got those bulb deals on the bottom.
Yeah, I would need to do some checking, but I believe applications of 2,4-D are effective. This is a perennial weed, so one application is likely not going to fix the problem. Persistence with multiple applications is important. And one of the things about that is it doesn't have a lot of leaf surface area, so it's really good. It's really important to get good coverage on that to be able to get as much herbicide translocated down into the plant as possible. So
Right.
that's about the best advice I think I can give them.
Okay, Lowell, and
It's
actually
tough.
it's kind of pretty.
Yeah,
In the right spot,
It's
of
all in
course.
the eye of the beholder.
We're going to come back with a question to you, Lauren. This is about rhubarb plants, and this is a viewer in Belleville, Kansas. They have rhubarb in rows between the trees in their orchards, and they have what they're calling rust on the ones grown from seed. They got this from a seed source outside their local area. They don't have any problem with transplanted rhubarb. No evidence of insects, anything else going on the foliage. They have had a lot of rain in that location. So I don't know
things.
about that.
I have not seen rust on rhubarb. It may happen. I have seen rhubarb though that it will get sometimes a reddish color that someone might describe as rust that was more of environmental injury. So I'm not aware of a disease that would look like that, but so I would tend to go that. I do want to follow up on something else too, Kim. I've got, many times we don't have morel mushrooms to bring in, so we have one. I just wanted to follow up on the stem to show a picture of this. When you're asked about the false morels, so they will look, the false morels and the regular morels will look very similar, but if you look at the inside of this, when you open it up, it's completely hollow.
With
And
the
there's
bug.
usually a few little bugs. There's a
Little
couple
bugs.
of little bugs in there. But so you usually find those in there. That's one reason to soak your morels in salt water after you find them to get the bugs out. But they will be completely hollow, typically. So if
Alright.
anyone's out collecting, apparently they're finding them right now.
And
So,
that would answer a question somebody just asked us.
and so you can go out, but just make sure you know what you're collecting.
All
Because
right.
there's old mushroom hunters and there's bold mushroom hunters, but there aren't any old, bold mushroom hunters.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.
So have fun.
Kelly, we have a bit of time here, just a bit, for a picture about an evergreen that was sustained damage with the wet snow last winter. It's never popped back up again. They want to know, is there anything they can do about it? It looks like a juniper of some sort.
Right, it does. At this point, it was last winter, so it wasn't just this past February storm, the one big storm that we had. If it was this February, which it doesn't sound like it was, you might wait a little while. It could even take till the end of the summer. But if it was last winter and it still hasn't popped back up, and it probably won't. The problem is you can't really prune evergreens like juniper, and I agree that's what it looks like.
Right.
You can't ever prune it back beyond where there's green growth because it won't regenerate or regrow new growth to cover up that area. So, from the picture, it's hard to tell if maybe that one branch could be pruned out, and possibly with time, it could take even a few years that other growth would come in and eventually fill in that space. You can analyze that, and then you could possibly give it a try, or you could still wait. Maybe, maybe. I doubt it. Again, that it'll pop back up, but again, it's a judgment call on the homeowner at this point.